Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
All right. Hey, our second show on I Don't Know, Maybe I Love You, which is a great title by our friend, Brother James Twyman. And now you can get James's books, by the way. There's 24 books total that James has written, including New York Times bestsellers. But this last one really is captivating because of where we find ourselves as a civilization, as a country. And this extends, interestingly enough, beyond the United States. I talk to people in all parts of the world like you do, James, and they all seem to want to talk about the American election, the American political system, what's happening day by day over here. I don't know why they find it so interesting. I mean, maybe their countries are a little more peaceful than we are right now about their thing. Anyway, welcome back to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. So good to be back. And by the way, in speaking of the United States and leadership, I think it's interesting. This past week, the Vatican, the conclave, elected an American pope. So we've got kind of two sides of the same thing going on here. It's
very interesting. Very interesting. Matter of fact, I have a friend who actually grew up with him in Chicago. So it's a small world. A lot of history going on, that's for sure. So let's go back to the book, because you drove across the country, which is an experience for anybody. I've done a little bit of that myself in the past, and you encounter all sorts of things that you don't count on a trip like that. But you had a focus to analyze, if you will, diffuse, if you will, some of what was going on during the election cycle here prior to the 2024 election. And starting out in North Conway, New Hampshire, you met a gentleman that had a sign for Donald Trump that said, "Vote for Trump or else." Let's pick up there your conversation with that gentleman.
Yeah, I was curious what the or else was. Clearly, this was someone who was very passionate in his support for Donald Trump, which is great. Be passionate. But as we have seen happen so many times, this pandemic of being right, it's like you have to do what I say you need to do or else. And we saw in 2020 what can happen in the experience of or else with the storming of the Capitol and people who were convinced that there was foul play. It was shoved down their throat, and the or else came to be. And I don't know what would have happened if, say, Kamala Harris had been elected. Maybe something unforeseen. But this particular gentleman, as strong as he was in his support and his ideas, when he was with me, someone who just was listening to him. And sure, I shared my opinion, but I didn't do it in a way to make him wrong. I just said, you have your opinion, I have mine. I respect you. I'm hoping you'll respect me. There was something organic that happened with him. It was like the air or the defensiveness went out of him. He didn't have to prove anything. He thought I was a little bit weird, but that's pretty common actually, but he was willing to listen and maybe to consider a few of the things that I had said to him more than he might have otherwise. So that was a good beginning to that road trip. It started that morning. And then as I continued to drive first down over to visit some friends in Maine and then Massachusetts and finally New Jersey and Pennsylvania, just doing this musical based on the life of St. Francis of Assisi. I met people who agreed with me and didn't agree with me, but we listened to one another. And I could feel that depolarization happening on its own.
What about Cuba? You have a comparison in the book on Cuba and some of the events that have taken place over there over the years.
Yeah, I have a good friend named Father Luis. He's also an Episcopal priest in Yonkers. And he was raised in Cuba. He actually had to leave there and come to the US. And he is obviously a very unique perspective, being in a totalitarian country where you're told what to believe, you're told how to act. And if you don't act in the way that you're told, there can be great consequences. And he actually could see things moving in that same direction here. And I think we need to pay attention to that because if things continue to move in the direction of totalitarianism, the country could look very different than it does now very quickly. People often they look at a situation like Germany in the 30s and 40s and they say that could never happen here. We need to wake up and realize that it could happen here. Some of the things that sparked that very strong reaction in Germany are happening here. And so this is why it's so important for us to take the pressure off, to bring the heat down. And I call that depolarization. We're so polarized and we're so convinced that we're right. The other thing that I think is interesting, it used to be that you had people on the far left, you had people on the far right, and they were about as different from each other, had different beliefs, listened to the different people as could be. Now it's like that bar has been made into a circle, and people on the far left are listening to the same voices as many of the people on the far right are listening to. And so we've got to unbreak that. We need to bring that back into some kind of alignment and come back to the center where, like we discussed in our last segment, where we realize we have a lot more in common than we think we do.
Exactly. I quote John Kennedy a lot. You know, Kennedy's statement about it's not a Democratic solution or a Republican solution. It's an American solution. I think I'd even go one step further. Okay, how about the right solution? Okay, because that's what really, at the end of the day, what do most people want, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world? They want our political leaders to make good decisions based for the population that doesn't hurt people and doesn't take away their rights to, their opinion. Because one thing we're lucky on is that we're allowed to have an opinion in this country. But sometimes, to your point, those opinions become so strong that they influence people who might not be able to divorce the fact that, okay, that's my political opinion, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and do something terrible to my neighbor who might have a sign for the other candidate on his or her lawn, for example. Yeah. And that might be the worst thing if it's a sign, but what if it's the person's dog? What if it's the person's child? And that stuff, I don't think a lot of that's happened, but it could, to your point. And that's what started to happen in some of these other countries. Let's talk about your friend Vicky. I guess she shocked you that she was a MAGA supporter.
Yeah, Vicky has been really my best friend for 30 years. She's a teaching partner of mine, and ask anyone who knows her, and they'll tell you that she's probably the most loving, holy person they know. So it was with great surprise that I found out that she was a very strong Donald Trump supporter. I just automatically assumed that anyone who's loving and giving would not be that. So I learned something there that I think was very important. And I stayed at her house actually on this tour for about 5 days. And we had a chance to really talk about that. And it does come down to just not thinking that I have all the right answers and that if someone disagrees with me, they're automatically wrong. Because I respect Vicky, I listened to her. I listened to her opinion, why she feels the way she felt, and I understood so much better. It didn't change me, but I think it helped take the heat off what could have been a difficult situation. The truth is, we probably all have people in our lives who, like Vicky, who we love, who may have a different opinion, and we need to let that be okay. That it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. They may be a wonderful person like Vicky is, helping people, loving people, but they have whatever reason they have. Another example that you remember from the book that happened a few years before this that I just think is so funny. I was on Match.com, okay? And I met a woman and we had a few phone conversations and then we went out to dinner. It was our first date was probably the best first date of my whole life. Oh my gosh, I was just really enjoying my connection with this woman. So we went out on a second date. It was even better. So good. So I had high hopes. And on the third date, we went out to dinner and she said, "There's something I need to tell you. My kids said I shouldn't tell you this, but I feel like I need to be in integrity." And I said, there's nothing you can say that's going to change the way I feel. So what is it? She said, I love Donald Trump. And I remember exactly what my reaction was. I went, what? That was like a line in the sand for me. How you seem, first of all, this is in Portland, so a very liberal city. I knew that she had a transgender daughter. Her son had another very Portland sounding job. And it just surprised me first. But I thought immediately, how can I be with someone who's passionate about Donald Trump? She began to share with me a little bit of why. She had a father who was a very liberal, leaning person who wanted to help people as they were transitioning out of prison. So he would often let men who were coming out of prison, who didn't have anywhere else to go, come and stay at his house with himself and his two daughters. And some bad things happened. So this woman equated someone who's a do-gooder with this pain. And she saw Donald Trump as being someone who was going to keep us safe. So it gave me compassion for her. The funny thing is we did get together one more time after that because I thought maybe if we could joke about it, laugh about it, have some humor around it, maybe there's hope. But I think I brought up a little joke about Fox News and that was it. But it just goes to show that it just because someone has a different opinion than you or supports a different candidate doesn't make them a bad person. And if we just listen to one another and consider the possibility that I don't know everything, maybe there's something you can teach me that I'll learn, but I have to have that foundation of love and respect. I'm not going to get anywhere without that.
But don't you think, I just side note from the book, don't you think sometimes that there's so many different things that a candidate represents where it's kind of like a menu in a restaurant? I like that. I don't like that. I agree with that. I'm okay with that. I really agree with that. I really disagree with that. And that's what it was coming down to because there was a time in our country, I think back to the 80s, right? Like our parents, for example. My parents were both Democrats. Why were they Democrats? Because my father was a union guy. Okay. So we were automatically Democrats because philosophically the unions at that time were very aligned with the Democratic Party. Not really the case anymore. We grew up as Democrats because that was good for labor. Therefore, that worked and we had food on the table, right? If the Republicans got it, they loved business. They weren't necessarily as good for the unions. So I grew up with that philosophy as a kid, right? And then you get into your later years and you start realizing, okay, let's even say that was the case today, whether it is or isn't, it's debatable. But there's always other things that it's not like it used to be chocolate and vanilla. Now it's like a swirl. Where I agree with that guy's saying, but I agree with what she's saying, going back to this election. I agree with what Kamala said on this, but I agree with what Trump says on this. And you swing back and forth. To me, that's probably 80% of us where like it's not like one person has a black hat, one person has a white hat. It's both reasonably intelligent people, right? And so you go, okay, there's things I agree and disagree with both of them about. But then you got to pull a lever for one of them. You got to decide, okay, who's going to represent our country better and our interests better. I think that's where a lot of people are confused because then they get on that 20% that you described, right? That far left, that far, they take one of whatever that candidate's positions are that you're opposed to and they mix it up and they add all of this other stuff to it that might not even be what that individual really is saying. And that's where Fox and MSNBC and CNN are culprits, if you will, because they keep stabbing at here's what they said, here's what they mean. And then if you're a little bit off on that topic, if that topic is your hot button, then all of a sudden you want to fight with everybody that has a different opinion of whatever that position that candidate has. That's what I'm seeing in certain people. Like I said, my one sister and I, it is what it is. We're centrist. But my one sister, my other sister, she's just hates Donald Trump to give everybody $5 million gold bars tomorrow. She still hates him. But would you take the gold bar? Probably, but I still hate him. Okay, and that's her position. But to that point, and I do have a question on here, James, rather than a statement, is how do we get those people to realize, okay, that on that topic, I get that particular one, right? And we could pick from either candidate or either political party. We can pick this or that and say, okay, that's really important to this person. Your friend Vicky liked Donald Trump because of certain things about him, probably not everything about him. Other people like Kamala. My sister in New York loved Kamala. She didn't love everything about her. So how do we get those people to go, okay, on that issue, I get that's important to you. But what about the totality of that person's, if they were in power, their decision making, do you agree with it or disagree, whether it's economic, whether it's social issues, whether it's international issues, border issues, go through all the different topics today that may change in 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, or were different when Kennedy ran, or different when FDR ran, or different when George Washington ran the country. There were issues during all of those people's time as well. But so my question is, how do you get them to go, okay, on that issue, I get why that one's really important to you?
There's something that you brought up. I can't remember if it was in this segment or the last. I think it was the last segment about politicians and their own self-interest, maintaining their career, staying in power. Okay, this is what is so often important to politicians. They want to remain in power. So they'll say what they have to say, they'll do what they have to do, and often that means taking that one issue that is going to stir people up and get them to do whatever they say, whether it be immigration or abortion or whatever it might be. And they're going to poke at that one issue. Same thing is true for much of the news media. They're going to take that one issue and they're going to just push it so hard because they know that they're going to get people to keep listening. So it's in their self-interest to push extremism. So what might have been a 5% extremist on the left or a 5% extremist on the right then grows to 10%, 15%, 20%. Extremism begins to build. And then it's like a teeter-totter, is that what they call it? It's boom, gets so hard. There's nothing to keep it balanced now. It's always back and forth. So the first thing I think is to let go of our own self-interest and to realize that we're all in this together. My friend Vicky is a good example. I could have said, you've been a friend of mine for 30 years, and you and I have taught around the world, but I don't like what you just said about this particular person, therefore you're out of my life. That wouldn't have made any sense at all. It wouldn't have been in either one of our interest. It was better to listen and to learn something new about someone that I really care for. So I think the beginning of this has to be letting go of our self-interest. The other thing that we see happening a lot, and something that I do think is very detrimental, is what I'll call Christian nationalism. The idea that our politics and our religion are intertwined. And we see this so often that if I'm from a particular church or a particular way of believing, then I'm automatically going to support one candidate or another. And we forget that Jesus, if we want to look at it from a Christian lens, Jesus was not a patriot. Okay, everyone thought that Jesus had come, or that the Messiah would come to lead the battle against the Romans, to set the Israelites free. That wasn't what Jesus was about at all. He was about love, he was about compassion, and he was about people understanding one another. Maybe that's what we need, letting go of our self-interest and the things that we think need to happen, and coming back to those simple lessons, once again, that we learned when we were in kindergarten. To be kind even when someone doesn't agree with you, to have compassion for people. Don't wrap up religion and politics. They don't go together. This country was founded on the separation of those two things. So if we can, just through the way that we interact with one another, love one another, respect one another, it's going to begin to take the heat off. And maybe those two extremists on either side will begin to shrink again. And so many more of us who are in the middle place are going to realize that we want the same things. And I like what you said also about how there are certain things that in the Republican agenda that I'm very supportive of. And same thing on the left. That's probably true for most of us. So we don't have to just be on one side or the other. We can reach across the aisle, as they say, and realize that we're all in this together. So let's get along.
And you know what? You're absolutely right. Because if you made a laundry list and you said, okay, here's 100 topics, 50 topics, whatever, most people would go, okay, should we have a border? Yes. Should we just let everybody across it? Not necessarily. Let's know who they are. Just like I was in Costa Rica, since we talked last, I was in Costa Rica. I went to Costa Rica. They want to know where I was staying, how long I was staying, etc. And they're entitled to know. I don't live in their country. I don't pay taxes in their country. Am I staying long term or am I a tourist? Things like that, that most people go, yeah, we do want to know who's coming in because it's a safety issue, right? You know, if they're bringing drugs, we don't need them here. We got enough of our own drug dealers, for example, right? Let's have some rules of the road. Now, if somebody's coming in because they're coming from a war-torn country and they need refuge, that's what we've always been about as a country. We don't need to turn those people away, for example. I don't want to get my own thoughts into this, but to make a point, in other words, if we looked at some poor woman who came across here where her husband was beating her half to death and she came with her children, are we really going to send her back? Or are we going to help her out? But if she's a drug mule, maybe we need to evaluate that differently. But my point about that is those are the common ground things where we can go, okay, there's common sense to all of this. Like what JFK said about it's not a solution of either party. There are solutions that make sense and there's solutions that don't. And I think that's about 80, probably 90% of people can look at those things and go, yeah, most of those things we're in agreement, maybe not in how we deal with them, but that we deal with them, I guess is the point. And then there's the radical stuff. But I want to stay on a statement that you made in this book. And I love this statement. I love to give us a little bit more input on it. Courage and love are the same thing.
Yeah.
Love that.
It's true. Love leads us to courage, and we need to have the courage of our convictions. And if our conviction is to be a depolarizing force, which is, I think, the direction that love will always lead, because it leads us back together. Okay, but sometimes it takes courage to stand against the current and to really assert ourselves. And but all the people who have changed the world, this is how they've done it. We take people like King and Gandhi and so many others. They did everything that they did for love. Because, like, take Gandhi, for example, he didn't hate the English, he loved the English, but he felt that his people needed freedom. And so he asserted himself in a compassionate, loving way, but he asserted himself in a courageous way. He was willing to take the hits so that they could see that this was not justice. Once again, we need more people like Gandhi, King, St. Francis. If we can have the courage of our convictions, be loving and compassionate, then we'll inspire others to do the same. And a movement will begin. That's why, for me, I'm hoping people will go to the website, d-polarize.com, and take the survey, get the book if you haven't already, because this is where the movement starts. We have to have courage. We have to be loving. This is not about being against anyone who disagrees with me. I love these, like with Vicky. I love Vicky. She doesn't have the same opinion that I have, but this is someone that I dearly love. And therefore, I have to respect her, have compassion. So these are simple things, really.
James, in wrapping up, a couple other things that you mentioned here that I think are so key. Just love the story with Stan Martin, if you can tell that story briefly.
Stan the man. Yeah, I'm driving across the country. It was late at night. I pull into a truck stop so I can get some sleep. And there's this enormous man who looked pretty scary to me. And he actually recognized me because I guess his wife has read some of my books. And this man who seemed so scary was so insightful. And I just really loved the guy. He was just such an interesting person. So I definitely wrote a chapter about him and his insights. And once again, someone that I could have easily judged as scary and stay away from ended up being someone who I learned a great deal from. And if he and I lived in the same area, I think we'd be good friends.
Yeah, he sounds like a great guy. Empathy doesn't require agreement. Boy, that's a strong statement. I love that statement. Comment on it. Empathy doesn't require agreement. Think about that, folks, as James comments about it.
Yeah, we need to be empathetic and to understand one another. Like with the woman I was telling you about on that date, I had empathy because she told me her story. She told me something that was deeply personal and very vulnerable that helped me understand why she was supporting who she supported. And I don't have to agree with her, but I can have empathy for her and listen. See, this is what we don't do today. We're not listening to one another. And if we don't listen, we can't have empathy. And if we can't have empathy, we can't have love. So it begins with just that simple step of listening, not interrupting, not trying to convince you of anything, but just listening to one another. And maybe I'll learn something. But if I have that foundation of love and respect, magic can happen.
How do we turn somebody around that has that opinion of I know and you don't?
Yeah, that's a tough one because the only thing I can really do is to practice what I preach, to listen to have a spirit of depolarization, to try and bring us. Maybe it's as simple as maybe I could find something that I do have in common with them. If they like a particular sport, maybe we like the same team or anything that we can have some agreement on. And then maybe we can build on that agreement. And then after a little while, we realize, gosh, we're not as different from each other as we thought we were. And then a real conversation can begin. But if we're just focused on convincing the other person that they're wrong and that they need to think like me in order to be right, I'm not going to get anywhere. So listening, having empathy, understanding people, it's pretty simple. And I also realize that it's not for you or for someone else to do it. I have to be the one. I'm the one who needs to take these steps. And maybe if I do, something will happen between the two of us and it'll inspire you to do the same.
I love it. This has been a privilege and an honor. And so, where do they get the book again? Tell them about the websites and what's next for Brother James.
You can get the book anywhere, Amazon. If you go to the website, de-polarize.com, you can order it right there. I would love for people to leave reviews. Reviews are so great on Amazon. It helps people feel comfortable with what they want to buy. And I'm heading back to Mexico tonight. I have a community there called Namaste Village. So people from different backgrounds, different spiritual practices, but we come together just to be in that vibration of everything we've talked about here today.
This has been a privilege, my friend. I know you're at a conference there that you got to get back to. I totally appreciate it. We got more books coming down the road.
I might. I thought I was done, but I don't think I'll ever be done.
I'm just thinking, yeah, you got at least a couple of titles out of what we've been talking about here.
Yeah.
Certainly think of. But thank you again, and continue to do the work that you're doing because this is needed. This is, like I said, I've seen it in my own family, as I referenced in our last conversation. I've seen family members not talking to family members, people who've loved each other for 40 years. And for what? Especially now, none of us are young anymore. You know?
Yeah.
Let's not let this divide us. Let's look at that common ground that you talked so much about.
John, it's been a pleasure to be on all of these shows with you. You're doing a great job, and I just thank you.
Thank you, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.